Chris Faulkner, Mr. Fracking, the Frackmeister, all these things. If you look at where fracking is now, literally not even a decade ago, half a decade ago, it wasn't even a term that was known.
Sure.
How has it changed the US vision of energy?
Well, I think that there's an evolution that occurred during the first 20 years. So this wasn't an overnight success. There was a lot of work and time went into this, but the revolution that took place literally between 2005 and 2009, I think, was extraordinary. You look at 2005 and we had huge import forecasts in the United States, 56 billion cubic feet. And the smartest guys in the room, Alan Greenspan and the like, said, look, the United States better gear up to find itself in a situation to manage all these imports. And you now look at the UK, and I think we have a very similar situation occurring today in the United Kingdom. Now, you go back to 2009 in the US, that forecast went to zero. And why did it go to zero? Because of fracking, right? And now there's 100 years worth of supply. The United States has now converted itself to a net exporter of distillate fuels. It's on the eve, say within 3 years, of being an exporter of natural gas, hopefully to find folks here in Europe or Asia. And so I think it's extraordinary. And the United States 3 weeks ago surpassed Russia as the biggest natural gas producer on the planet. We will be the biggest crude oil producer on the planet, surpassing Saudi Arabia by 2017 or 2020. And you look at just last year alone, our oil production went up by 20% to 7.5 million barrels a day in 1 year. We have so much natural gas, I don't know what to do with it, and I'd love to get rid of it because the price has gone from $15 per thousand cubic foot to $3.50. So a pricing model similar to the UK just in 2005. Now that number's down 80% from where it was, and so folks are saving money, and it's starting to work.
And I don't doubt that at all. Economically, it's an absolute win-win. Environmentally, people say it's a lose-lose. We've seen the video, the fire out of the taps. Sure. We've seen the protests. We've seen a big sort of, is it worth it at the price? How do you answer that?
Look, I'm selling facts and not fiction, and I'd hate to be on the other side of the table, right? So the environmentalists, don't want natural gas, and I really believe they don't want natural gas, not because of fracking, but because they're scared that natural gas will stymie or slow down development of renewable energy. And they have, some concern there because, look, natural gas is a bridge fuel, it's clean, it works, it's here today, and there's an abundance of it, whereas renewables don't work. They've been subsidized for 20 years, they're very, very expensive, and they have a long ways to go. The EPA, under President Obama, on 3 different occasions has been told to do a study on the environmental impact of fracking. President Obama, not a huge fan of the oil and gas industry. With all the resources and all the time and effort behind the EPA in the United States, those 3 reports have come back and said, look, there's no direct connection from contamination of water and fracking. 1.5 million wells fracked in the United States. We fracked 1,900 wells last month alone. I can tell you in the era of instant communication and social media, if there were instances of groundwater communication, or contamination from communication with fracking, folks getting sick from drinking their water, I can tell you right now, within 10 seconds, you'd know about it sitting right here today, because that's how fast the message moves. I live in the Barnett Shale. I drink the water every day. Proof's in the pudding.
Is it a
in this case, the water.
Okay, proof's in the pudding. Is there the risk, the contamination, the Bhopal risk, that something gets into the water table because it's such a new science, it's such a new technology? You can't sit here and tell me, Chris, that it's totally safe. There's always that risk, isn't there?
Oh, there's a risk in anything. There's a risk from Fukushima and a nuclear meltdown. There's a risk in windmills and solar panels releasing, the toxic chemicals that make up the photovoltaic sensors. The process is not flawed. The process is safe, okay? A human being gets put into the equation, things can happen. But I can tell you right now, it's not by sheer luck that we've fracked 1.5 million wells in the United States and haven't contaminated the drinking water. It's because of the fact that we take precaution when we enter and near the water table. Folks don't know that we put 3 layers of steel pipe, 3 layers of cement to enshroud the water table and protect it against contamination. Ask yourself a logical question. What do I have, or what does an industry have as an incentive to contaminate drinking water? Because one, it would put the brakes on this party overnight, right? It would cost a fortune for us to clean up. But imagine someone in the UK right now decides, you know what, let's not wait for regulation. Let's jump out ahead of this thing and go frack a well and screw something up, okay? I can tell you right now the UK becomes the next France. So there's no incentive for me to do anything like that. The incentive is to take the extra precaution and the extra safety measures, which the industry is doing. That's what I think folks need to focus on. It's not the fact that is it safe or not. It is safe. The proof's in the pudding. We've done it in the United States since 1947 at some level. Hell, we were using napalm in 1947. It's come a long way since then.
You took at the whole issue, and the answer has been fracking has put energy prices on a downward spiral. Sure. It's good for the US economy and export, all of those things. But it can only really work in your country because you've got so many huge swathes of land with no one on it. You look at a small island like the UK,
sure.
People say, hang on, Chris, your frack dream is not going to come true. It won't make that difference, and we have too overpopulated for it not to affect people. How do you answer that?
Look, I mean, we drill wells in Fort Worth, underneath universities, underneath downtown, underneath my own home. There's wells.
There's a well under your house.
There is. Within 10 square miles or around in a radius, there's 25,000 wells drilled in the Barnett Shale, right beneath where myself and my family live. And I have no concern about that. Think about the technology today. So 5 acres, this piece of paper represents 5 acres square. We can set up a rig in one spot and drill 24 different wells from that one position, okay? So it's not about moving a rig and drilling one and moving on. Things have progressed so fast and so far, we can drill 2 or 2.5 miles in a horizontal direction from one stationary point. So I think as technology continues to escalate and innovation continues to drive this industry, I think that the excuses that people have to say, look, it's not going to work here, they're going to go away, they're going to dwindle, and at some point they have to say, look, do you want to keep the heat on or not? And if you have a better plan, I'm all ears. But until then, okay, I am for shale gas and for fracking, and environmentalists are against everything. What are they for? I don't know. I can't get a straight answer.
Let's talk about the UK picture. You're aware, you're a man who travels around. We are now shifting from being a government that wanted to be the greenest ever, sure, putting in all these green policies, which are now, there's a backlash from the public because the chickens have come home to roost. It costs a lot of money.
Sure.
Do you really think fracking is this kind of panacea? It can't really be, can it? Isn't a short-term win for a long-term actually perhaps not a long-term gain?
You know, I think what fracking will allow us to do is it will bridge into the future. Now, how far that bridge may be, it could be 40, 50 years or beyond. The reality is that in the Bowen Basin, okay, there's 1,300 TCF worth of gas. If I can extract 10% of that, and the British Geological Survey says the same thing, we can power the UK for 50 years. If we can extract 20%, 100 years, and so forth. I think that that alone is enough incentive to say we need to investigate this and figure out, one, if it's true, and two, if we can do it. Because at the end of the day, energy security has to be a part of the conversation, especially for elected officials, right? Think about this. If I'm going to be an MP and I'm going to be down, say, in Sussex, and I say, you know what? Here comes my no fracking sign, and we don't frack. Yeah. Now, also another MP up in the Bowen Basin up, in Blackpool says, hey, I'm for fracking. And now this area 2 years from now becomes extremely wealthy. They got new schools, they got new roads, they got a budget of billions of dollars in surplus. So now who's getting elected and who's getting reelected, right?
Is it economics? Does it come down to that? At the end of the day, do you think what happened in America is, because you've had a green movement,
sure,
as long as we've had
sure,
it, even probably more vociferous, is it basically the truth of economics? At the end of the day, people want to go green, but they don't want to pay for it. And the reality is they'd rather take the fracked gas because it's cheaper.
Hell, I think everything's about economics. It's all about money. Money drives the whole world, right? I think that folks look at their electricity bills over last year to this year, and you have to question the big six and say, why did they go up by 10%? How much more can folks afford? How much closer can we get in this country to running out of natural gas like we did last year? Gas storage this year is lower than last. We came within 6 hours of having no natural gas. You want to freeze to death? You want to talk about how we can extract a massive resource beneath this country? And I think that conversation has to have some common sense at some point, because look, you can only scream and rant and rave so much before you have to realize that it's fact or fiction, okay? This is not about, are we supposedly going to be able to do this? The United States has done it. Will it happen in the same scale here where an explosion takes place of natural gas production? Probably not. But it doesn't have to. If it happened at a fraction of what had happened in the United States, we're in a hell of a lot better position than we were, 2 years ago.
Do you think finally the US politics has changed? Obama's backtracked on some of these green tax because the fiscal reality of what shale can bring has changed policy. Do you think that could happen here?
I think in a way he's backtracked. In the State of the Union, he mentioned natural gas, he mentioned, hydraulic fracking. The reality is that he's invested American tax dollars in renewable energy programs that have failed time and time again. Obviously, he's a horrible venture capitalist. But the reality is that he can't ignore the $75 billion we paid in tax revenue last year, the $285 billion in GDP stimulus we provided as an industry, the 10 million folks who are employed thanks to us, and the 3 million new jobs created from shale gas and shale oil. At the end of the day, politicians love those kind of numbers because they get reelected. Now, he's already done, he's got his second term, and he's ready to move on to bigger and better. But the reality is, I think that it all goes down to economics. It all goes back to stimulus of whatever that may be. In this case, it's our country. And it all ties back at some point to to energy security. How long can Russia hold this country hostage? How many more times are they going to turn off the gas before someone blinks, right? America got held hostage back in the 70s. We're on the road to making sure that doesn't happen again. Why? Because of fracking. So I think that folks have got to find a common ground and some kind of middle ground. That's me being an optimist. Probably will never happen. When are they going to raise the right flag and say we won? Probably never. However, I think that at some point, and God forbid, the catalyst for that is that this winter we run out of heat over here. Folks may start fracking themselves after that, and I think that's really the message you may have to get to.
I hear what you say. My final point is, though, the environment. At what cost, if you look at it all? How would you say, people say, I get you, I hear what you're saying, and a good argument. But Chris, do you not care about the environment?
I care about the environment very much, and I think shale gas is saving the planet from coal. I think when you look at the environmental impact that coal continues to have, go to China, okay? You'll figure out how bad coal is. You look at, we've raised our natural gas production by 40% in the U.S., at the same time reducing greenhouse gas and carbon emissions by 20%, a delta of 60% during that short amount of time. So it's hard to argue that whatever's left of coal may be a part of the mix, nuclear could be a part of the mix, renewables, shale gas, natural gas imports, all these things create this big round circle called the energy mix puzzle. They all have to be a part of that, including energy inefficiency. So you can't say shale gas will displace everything else, or renewables are going to come from where they are today and take us all to this promised land. The reality is that renewables will be a part of the mix, small, right? They're not going to displace any large amount of hydrocarbon-based fuel until they can store the energy that they produce, until the cost comes down. If you want to see folks get mad, you show them their electric bill ran off 100% renewable energy, and I can assure you they're going to be for fracking as soon as you say that bill.
Not backwards and coming forwards. Chris Faulkner, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That at all. Economically, it's an absolute win-win. Environmentally, people say it's a lose-lose. We've seen the video, the fire out of the taps. Sure. We've seen the protests. We've seen a big sort of, is it worth it at the price? How do you answer that?
Look, I'm selling facts and not fiction, and I'd hate to be on the other side of the table, right? So the environmentalists, don't want natural gas, and I really believe they don't want natural gas, not because of fracking, but because they're scared that natural gas will stymie or
Chris Faulkner, Mr. Fracking, the Frackmeister, all these things. If you look at where fracking is now, literally not even a decade ago, half a decade ago, it wasn't even a term that was known. Sure. How has it changed the US vision of energy?
Well, I think that there's an evolution that occurred during the first 20 years. So this wasn't an overnight success. There's a lot of work and time went into this, but the revolution that took place literally between 2005 and 2009, I think, was extraordinary. You look at 2005, and we had huge import forecasts in the United States, 56 billion cubic foot. And the smartest guys in the room, Alan Greenspan and the like, said, look, the United States better gear up to find itself in a situation to manage all these imports. And you now look at the UK, and I think we have a very similar situation occurring just from the planet, surpassing Saudi Arabia by 2017 or 2020. And you look at just last year alone, our oil production went up by 20% to 7.5 million barrels a day in 1 year. We have so much natural gas, I don't know what to do with it, and I'd love to get rid of it because the price has gone from $15 per 1,000 cubic foot to $3.50. So a pricing model similar to the UK just in 2005. Now that number's down 80% from where it was, and so folks are saving money, and it's starting to work.
And I don't doubt.
In the United Kingdom. Now you go back to 2009 in the US. That forecast went to zero. And why did it go to zero? Because of fracking, right? And now there's 100 years worth of supply. The United States has now converted itself to a net exporter of distillate fuels. It's on the eve, say within 3 years, of being an exporter of natural gas, hopefully to the fine folks here in Europe or Asia. And so I think it's extraordinary. And the United States 3 weeks ago surpassed Russia as the biggest natural gas producer on the planet. We will be the biggest crude oil producer.